welcomes you all this evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. I've prepared a special collection of night shift stories for you to enjoy. So, sit back, relax, and let the darkness take over as we dive into some chilling tales that are sure to send a shiver down your spine. Story: The Watchman's Lament. It was late November when I first took the job as a night watchman at the old Forsyth Manor, a mansion on the outskirts of town. The place had been abandoned for decades, but recently, it had been repurposed into a museum. Not many people came by at night, so the job mostly involved making sure everything was locked up and secure. But even so, the place was huge, 3 stories, with long hallways and creaking floors, full of dark corners and drafty rooms. The kind of place that felt like it had a life of its own. I wasn't alone. The night shift usually had a couple of us, rotating duties. There was Anthony, a seasoned veteran in his 40s, who had been working the night shift here for over 5 years. Then, there was John, a new hire, much younger than me, but eager to prove himself. We started our shifts together and had a few weeks of easy work ahead, just locking up, walking the perimeter, and checking security cameras. It was a normal night, or so I thought. At about 11 p.m., after a quick round of checks, Anthony, John, and I gathered in the break room for a snack. The air was chilly, and the wind outside made the large windows rattle, but inside, the warmth from the heater was a welcome relief. The dim light of the room gave it a cozy, albeit eerie, feeling. We laughed and exchanged stories about past jobs, mostly harmless banter. But then, it happened. We heard footsteps. They weren't loud or hurried, just a steady, rhythmic sound, almost like someone walking in soft shoes across the hardwood floor. The hallway outside our break room was empty, but the noise was unmistakable. At first, we thought it was one of the other security guards messing around, trying to scare us. But as the steps grew closer, we realized it wasn't a joke. I glanced at Anthony, who had gone stone-cold quiet, his eyes scanning the hallway through the small window in the door. He didn't move. John, ever the curious one, stood up and opened the door to investigate. The sound stopped abruptly. John stepped into the darkness of the hallway, his flashlight casting a faint beam on the polished floors. I could see him tense up. His hand gripped the handle of his flashlight like a weapon. He checked the hallway from one end to the other, but there was nothing. No sign of anyone. The cameras in the hallway showed the same thing, a vacant, silent corridor. Nothing, John said, but his voice had a hint of nervousness. Then, as he was about to turn back to the break room, he pulled something out of his pocket. At first, I thought it was a keychain, something ordinary. But when John held it up to the light, we all froze. It was a set of old keys, unlike anything we had seen around the manor. They were rusty, their edges worn down from age. They seemed out of place. The keys weren't for any of the doors on our rounds, and they had a strange, almost archaic design. Anthony stared at them for a long moment before shaking his head. "We didn't even know these existed," he muttered. "We tested them on the doors, but they didn't fit anywhere." "That's odd," I said, not knowing what else to say. But then, the uneasy feeling that had been gnawing at me intensified. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. The next event happened several months later, and by then, I had grown accustomed to the strange noises and eerie atmosphere of Forsyth Manor. I'd made peace with the creaking floors and the strange way the shadows moved through the hallways at night. But one particular evening, my perception of the manor would be forever altered. It was nearing 2 a.m., and I had just started my second round of the night. The manor was dark, save for a few lights in the office. My flashlight cast long, flickering shadows on the walls as I made my way down the hallway, passing the old portraits of long-dead Forsyth ancestors. The mansion always felt colder at night, and tonight was no exception. As I walked past the main stairwell, I noticed something unusual. A shape. It was about the size of a soccer ball, floating just off the floor in the hallway, near the edge of the wall. I stopped dead in my tracks. The object was black, so dark it blended with the shadows around it. But it wasn't perfectly round, it had an odd, irregular shape, almost like an amoeba, and it moved. It drifted silently along the wall, keeping pace with me. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what to think. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it, maybe it was just my tired eyes playing tricks on me. But something deep inside urged me to investigate further. I approached it slowly, my flashlight beam following its movement. The air felt thick and heavy around me. And then, as if it had sensed me getting closer, the thing darted across the hallway in the blink of an eye. It moved so fast that I almost didn't believe it. But the electrical shock that shot through my fingers as I reached out to touch it was all too real. I gasped, pulling my hand back in pain. It was like I'd touched an electric fence. The shock was sharp, sudden, and intense. My heart raced, and I stumbled back, unsure of what I had just encountered. I stood there for a moment, staring at the spot where the thing had been. But there was nothing. No trace of it. The hallway was as silent as ever. End quote. Get a grip, end quote, I muttered to myself, though I couldn't stop my hands from trembling. I continued my round, but that incident lingered in my mind. What had I seen? Was it real? Or had my exhaustion finally gotten the best of me? The final encounter took place the following week, after I had settled into the routine of the job. It was a quiet night, but that didn't mean the manor wasn't full of surprises. I was walking along the second-floor hallway when I heard something. It was a faint noise, but unmistakable, the sound of keys jingling. It was coming from the old library, the room on the far end of the corridor. I didn't think much of it at first, I assumed it was just some old door rattling in the wind. But as I passed the library, I stopped. The door was open. I couldn't remember leaving it that way. Slowly, I approached the doorway. The jingle of keys stopped abruptly. Inside, the room was pitch black, save for the faint moonlight filtering through the large windows. But something was there, in the shadows. I couldn't make out what it was, but I could feel its presence, like a heavy weight in the air. Then, from the corner of the room, I saw it, the same set of old keys that John had found months ago, hanging from a nail in the wall. But the keys weren't just hanging there. They were moving. Slowly. Swaying back and forth, as if they were being blown by an unseen breeze. I stepped back, my heart pounding in my chest. The atmosphere felt thick, like the room itself was holding its breath. I knew that something had changed in that moment. I wasn't just dealing with a building full of old creaks and groans. There was something more. Something that had been here long before I ever stepped foot in Forsyth Manor. I didn't wait around to find out. I turned and walked away quickly, the sound of my footsteps the only thing that kept me company as I left the library behind. The next morning, after my shift, I met up with John and Anthony in the break room. I didn't say anything about what had happened the night before. But as we sat in silence, Anthony glanced up at me, his face pale. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I froze. "Saw what?" "The keys. And the thing in the hallway." I stared at him, my mouth dry. He nodded slowly. "It's been happening to everyone who works here," he said. "You're not the first to see it. And you won't be the last." I didn't know what to say. Anthony had been here for years, and if he was telling me this was normal, I knew I wasn't going to find any answers. I wasn't even sure I wanted them anymore. After a long silence, John spoke up, his voice shaking. "What do we do now?" Anthony just sighed, glancing at the old keys hanging on the wall. "We do our job. And we keep walking the halls." The strange occurrences continued. I never really figured out what I had experienced, but one thing was certain: Forsyth Manor wasn't just a building. It was a place full of memories, of secrets, and of things better left untouched. And as long as I worked there, I would be bound to uncover more of its dark history. But I wasn't sure how much more I could handle. So, I kept walking the halls, always listening for the footsteps that never seemed to stop. Story: The Silent Hallway. I've worked the night shift for years at a building that, on the surface, seems perfectly mundane. A large office tower in the middle of the city, tucked between two other skyscrapers, with little to distinguish it from the rest. It's not a historical landmark or a famous location, and it certainly doesn't attract much attention from the outside. For most of my tenure, I've considered it a job that requires minimal effort, one where I can breeze through my rounds, watch some TV, and head home after a quiet, uneventful shift. My routine is simple: I arrive around 9:30 p.m., make a quick round of the building to check the security monitors, and then settle into my small office on the top floor. My desk faces the security monitors, where I can watch the cameras in real time. If anything unusual happens, I'm supposed to check it out. But nothing ever happens. Not really. It's mostly empty office space after hours. The only people who come and go are the cleaning crew, who leave once their shift is over. But then, one night, everything changed. It started like any other evening. I was sitting at my desk, mindlessly scrolling through my phone while the office around me sat in silence. The building is old, but well maintained. The hum of the fluorescent lights above was the only sound, accompanied by the occasional creak of the floorboards under my feet. I'd gotten used to the quiet, and honestly, I preferred it that way. The stillness gave me a sense of calm, like I was the only person left in the world. Around midnight, I made my usual rounds. It's always the same. I walk through the halls, check the doors, and make sure everything is locked and secure. The building is large, and it takes me about 20 minutes to walk from one end to the other. As I made my way through the dimly lit corridors, I passed the small kitchenette on the 10th floor. The fridge had been left ajar, but I didn't think much of it. The cleaning crew often leaves things behind when they're rushing to finish their shifts. I shut the door and continued on my way. That's when I heard it. A soft sound, like the scrape of a chair against the floor, coming from the hallway ahead. I stopped in my tracks. The building was supposed to be empty, there was no one else here. Except for me. I glanced at the monitors in the security room. The hallway cameras were all clear. No movement. No one there. I shrugged it off, assuming it was just the building settling. It happens sometimes. The old wood creaks, the floors shift. Nothing to worry about. But as I turned the corner to the next Hallway, the sound came again, this time louder. A dragging noise, almost like something was being pulled across the floor. My heart skipped a beat. I stepped closer to the source of the noise, trying to remain calm. The hallway was dark, lit only by the dim glow of the emergency exit signs overhead. As I moved forward, the sound stopped. Everything was silent again, unnervingly so. I reached the end of the hallway and paused, listening. Nothing. Then, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt it. The sensation that someone, or something, was watching me. It wasn't the usual feeling you get when you're in a quiet place for too long. This was different. It was as though a presence was in the room with me, something close, just out of sight. I turned on my flashlight, scanning the hallway. No one in sight. The lights flickered briefly, then returned to their usual hum. I sighed, trying to calm my nerves. "It's just your mind playing tricks on you," I muttered under my breath. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it intensified. I returned to the security office, my hands a little unsteady as I sat back down at my desk. I checked the monitors again, hoping for some reassurance that everything was as it should be. But as I cycled through the cameras, something strange caught my eye. There, on one of the cameras near the elevator, I saw a figure standing in the hallway. It wasn't clear at first, just a shadowy silhouette, barely visible in the grainy footage. But there it was. The figure stood still, unmoving, as though it were waiting for something. I leaned forward, squinting at the screen. It was gone. Just like that. In the blink of an eye, the figure vanished from the camera feed. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled up the feed from the other cameras in that area. The hallway was empty. There was no one there. The hairs on my arms were standing on end. Now, I couldn't explain it. The figure had been there, of that, I was sure. But now, there was nothing. I decided to check the hallway again, hoping to find some logical explanation. Maybe someone had snuck in after hours, or maybe one of the cleaning crew had decided to stay late. But when I reached the same spot, there was nothing. The hallway was empty. No footprints. No sign of anyone. Confused and a little shaken, I made my way back to the office. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It was too quiet, too still. And then, I heard it again. This time, it was more distinct. A whispering sound, as though someone was talking, but the words were unintelligible. I froze, my hand still gripping the flashlight. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, but no matter how hard I tried to locate the source, it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I hurried back to the security office, my mind racing. My first instinct was to call the other guard, but I hesitated. What would I even tell him? That I heard whispers and saw a figure that disappeared? He would think I was losing my mind. I sat at my desk, staring at the monitors, trying to rationalize what was happening. Maybe it was a malfunction, or a trick of the light. Maybe I had fallen asleep and was dreaming. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The whispers stopped as suddenly as they had started. For a brief moment, the building was completely still again. I stood up, grabbing my flashlight and heading back toward the hallway where I had seen the figure. I made my way down the corridor, my footsteps echoing in the silence. When I reached the end of the hall, I stopped. There, just in front of the door to the stairwell, was the figure again. This time, it was clearer, but it wasn't a person. It was like a mass of shadows, swirling and shifting, as if it were made of darkness itself. I didn't know what to do. Should I run? Should I call the police? But before I could make a decision, the figure moved. It didn't walk. It drifted. Slowly, it floated toward me, and I felt an icy chill in the air, like the temperature had dropped by 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The figure reached out with what seemed to be hands, and as it did, the hallway lights flickered once more. The lights went out completely. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The darkness was oppressive, thick, and suffocating, as if the air itself had become heavier. I turned and ran, bolting down the hallway toward the stairwell, not daring to look back. My footsteps echoed in the silence as I raced toward the exit. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for air in the cool night. I stood there for what felt like hours, trying to calm myself down, trying to convince myself that I hadn't just seen something that defied all logic. But I had. I know what I saw. The next morning, when the day shift arrived, I told the other guard about what had happened. He listened quietly, and when I was done, he simply nodded. "You're not the first to experience something like that," he said. "It's happened before. Some people say the building's haunted." I didn't know what to make of that, but I wasn't about to stick around to find out. I left that night, and I never went back. Story: The Night Shift. I was just starting to get used to the quiet hum of the night shift. Working as a cashier at a 24-hour convenience store wasn't glamorous, but it was a job I could manage, at least, on the surface. The store sat at the edge of a quiet suburban neighborhood, tucked between a gas station and a closed diner. The only sounds after midnight were the occasional hum of passing cars and the creak of the refrigerator doors. I was 23, new to the city, and trying to make ends meet. The hours were long, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., but they paid well. The shift was quiet for the most part. Most of the regulars came in for a quick coffee or a snack, exchanged a few words, and left. I didn't mind. It gave me time to zone out, listen to podcasts, and get through the slow nights. It was my 4th week on the job when I first noticed him. A man in his mid-30s. Probably, always wearing a long black jacket and a baseball cap. He'd come in at around 2 a.m., like clockwork, buy a pack of cigarettes, and leave without saying a word. At first, I thought nothing of it. But after a few days, I started to notice something unsettling about him. He'd linger at the counter, staring at me for a beat too long. His eyes would trace the lines of my face, sometimes looking down at my hands, sometimes focusing on my neck. It made me feel like I was under a microscope, but I didn't think much of it at first. It was late at night. People get weird, right? It wasn't until the 3rd week that things escalated. It was a Tuesday night, or maybe a Wednesday. It was hard to keep track after all those graveyard shifts. I was scrolling through my phone, trying to stay awake when he came in, as usual, right on time. He grabbed his pack of cigarettes, but this time, instead of heading straight for the door, he stopped in front of me. End quote. "Hey," end quote, he said, his voice low and gravelly. I looked up, surprised. I wasn't used to people striking up conversations at this hour. "Hi," I replied, trying to keep it friendly but distant. "How can I help you?" He didn't respond right away, just stared at me. His eyes moved from my face to my uniform, and then back up to my eyes. It was almost like he was sizing me up, and it made my skin crawl. You know, he said slowly, you look like someone who's got a lot going on in her head. I forced a smile. I guess I've got a lot on my plate. His grin stretched a little too wide for my liking, and for a moment, I thought he might say something more, but then he just gave a short, almost dismissive nod and walked out. I felt a strange chill after he left. I shook it off, but his words kept echoing in my mind. You look like someone who's got a lot going on in her head. How did he know that? Had I been giving off some kind of vibe? I tried to focus on the work ahead, but my mind kept drifting back to that interaction. Over the next few days, he came back again and again, always at 2 a.m., always with the same routine. Pack of cigarettes. A few minutes of awkward silence. A few unsettling words. Before he left. One night, he lingered a little too long after paying, staring at the counter. I kept my eyes on the register, trying to appear as disinterested as possible. You ever think about getting out of here? He asked. Getting out of here? I repeated, trying to make sense of the question. You know, leave this place behind. Go somewhere else. Maybe we could go together. His voice was almost hypnotic, like he was trying to convince me of something. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I didn't know if he meant it as a threat or if he was genuinely trying to strike up a weird, creepy conversation. Not really, I replied curtly, my hand already reaching for the store phone behind the counter. End quote. I like it here. Thanks for the purchase. Have a good night. End quote. I turned away to grab the phone, and he seemed to get the hint. He left without another word. I made a mental note to tell my manager about him the next time I had a shift with her, but as always, the next night, he was back. It was the sixth night that he did something that would stick with me forever. I was outside, taking out the trash when I heard footsteps behind me. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned to find him standing there, not far from me, just watching. Can I help you? I asked, trying to keep the fear from my voice. You're always so busy, huh? He smirked, his hands shoved in his pockets. I stepped back instinctively, feeling the cool metal of the trash can against my back. I've got work to do, I said, turning toward the back door. He didn't move. I was just wondering if you ever get lonely. The words were quiet but loaded, and I knew right then that something was wrong. I had to get inside. I could feel his eyes on me as I pushed open the back door, practically running inside and locking it behind me. My heart was pounding as I returned to the counter, glancing out through the front windows. He was still standing there, just outside, staring at the entrance. The incident that finally pushed me over the edge happened 2 nights later. It was 6 a.m. and I was preparing to hand over the keys to the next shift manager. The phone rang, and I answered it, expecting it to be a regular customer or a supplier confirming delivery times. Hello? I said, wiping my tired eyes. You don't know me, a man's voice came through the phone, but I've been coming to your store for a while now. It was him. I could feel my stomach turn as he continued. I was wondering if you'd like to go out sometime. Maybe I could pay you for your time. I can offer you $500. I froze. My mind raced, but my body was locked in place, numb. The voice continued, I know you're busy, but I just thought I'd ask. I could make it worth your while. I hung up before he could say anything else, my hands shaking. The call ended, but the unease settled deep inside me. I walked over to my boss, trying to shake off the dread that had crept up my spine. Everything all right? He asked. No, I said, still visibly shaken. That guy, he called me. He offered me money, said he. Wanted more than just a conversation. I was expecting him to get angry, or at least ask me to file a report or something. But instead, he chuckled. $500, huh? Well, I'm sure you could get more than that. My stomach turned. He didn't get it. He didn't understand how violated I felt. That night, I couldn't shake the fear. The man didn't show up, but the damage was already done. I couldn't work in that place anymore. Not with him lingering, not with the manager brushing off my concerns. The next day, I handed in my resignation. I left the convenience store that day and never looked back. I found another job, somewhere safer. Somewhere where I didn't feel like I had to look over my shoulder every 5 minutes. But that man? He stuck with me for a long time. The feeling of being watched, the weight of unwanted attention, it lingered in the back of my mind. I still wonder what would have happened if I hadn't left when I did. Would he have kept coming back? Would something worse have happened? All I know is, no one should have to endure that kind of fear, especially at a job they're supposed to feel safe in. And yet, the world is full of places where people like him, and the bosses who dismiss their actions, keep showing up. For every woman who has the courage to leave, there are probably many others stuck, too afraid to speak out or ask for help. I may have walked away from that gas station, but the fear and the lesson stayed with me. And it's a lesson I'll never forget. Hey everyone, Mort here. Thanks so much for tuning in and listening to tonight's stories. I really hope you enjoyed them. If you did, it would mean a lot to me if you could drop a like and hit that subscribe button. And if you made it all the way to the end and aren't subscribed yet, well, that'd be awesome too. I put out new videos every week, so I hope you'll stick around. A huge thanks to my amazing members and patrons. You guys rock, and your names are right there on the screen. If you like this video, I think you'll enjoy this one too, so why not give it a watch? Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.